Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about Colin Powell. Much of the information that I'm using here comes from New York Times from an article written by Eric Schmidt. Colin Powell, who in 4 decades of public life served as the nation's top soldier, top diplomat, and national security advisor. He died this week. He was 84. The cause was complications of COVID-19, his family said in a statement, adding that he had been vaccinated and was being treated at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. A spokeswoman said his immune system had been compromised by multiple myeloma, which is a cancer of the blood, for which he had been undergoing treatment. He had been due to receive a booster shot for his vaccine last week, but, she said, had to postpone it when he fell ill. He had also been treated for early stages of Parkinson's disease. That statement makes Fox News hustler Tucker Carlson to be a liar who stated that vaccines don't work and used Powell's death as his reasoning. He never mentioned the cancer that the general had and the beginning of Parkinson's disease. General Powell was a pathbreaker, serving as the country's first black national security advisor, first black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and first black Secretary of State. Beginning with his 35 years in the Army, Powell was emblematic of the ability of American minorities to use the military as a ladder of opportunity. His was a classic American success story. Born in Harlem, in New York, of Jamaican parents, he grew up in the South Bronx and graduated from City College of New York, now called City University of New York, joining the Army through the ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Command. Starting as a young second lieutenant commissioned in the dawn of the newly desegregated Army, Mr. Powell served 2 decorated combat tours in Vietnam. He was later National Security Advisor to President Ronald Reagan at the end of the Cold War, helping to negotiate arms treaties and an era of cooperation with the Soviet President Mikhail S. Gorbachev. As chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mr. Powell was the architect of the invasion of Panama in 1989 and of the Persian Gulf War in 1991, which ousted Saddam Hussein from Kuwait but left him in power in Iraq. He stamped the Powell Doctrine on military operations: identify clear political objectives, gain public support, and use decisive and overwhelming force to defeat enemy forces. When briefing reporters at the Pentagon at the beginning of the Gulf War, Mr. Powell summed up the military's approach. Quote, "Our strategy in going after this army is very simple. First, we're going to cut it off, and then we're going to kill it." By the time he retired from the military in 1993, Mr. Powell was the most popular public figure in America owing to his straightforwardness, his leadership qualities, and his ability to speak in blunt tones that Americans appreciated. Once retired, Mr. Powell, a lifelong independent while in uniform, was courted as a presidential contender by both Republicans and Democrats, becoming America's most political general since Dwight Eisenhower in 1952. He should have been George W. Bush's vice president. The reason he wasn't was because his wife was adamantly against his running. She believed if he ran, he would be assassinated. She was wrong, of course. Proof is Barack Obama's 8 years as president with no attempt on his life, despite the country full of haters that might number a solid 10, 20, 30% of Americans, the Americans who hate blacks, as fertile ground to produce such an assassin. He returned to public service in 2001 as Secretary of State to President George W. Bush, whose father, Mr. Powell, had served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff a decade earlier. He left at the end of Mr. Bush's first term. Questions swirled in part around his United Nations speech leading up to the Iraq War, which was based on agreed-upon intelligence by every single intelligence agency of the U.S. and allies and agencies of every country that had an opinion on the subject. Intelligence, however, is not always right. General Powell's backing of Barack Obama in 2008 was criticized by conservative Republicans, but who cares? Conservatives still live in George Wallace's Alabama, where cops beat blacks with baseball bats when blacks asked for the right to vote. Before the 2016 election, he expressed disgust for Mr. Donald J. Trump in a batch of leaked emails that a Powell spokesman confirmed as authentic. He voted for Hillary Clinton, something I didn't do. Trump, he is quoted as saying, Trump is a national disgrace and an international pariah. Mr. Powell wrote that in one email that became public. Mr. Trump's attacks on whether Mr. Obama had been born in the United States also troubled Powell. The emails made clear, yup, the whole birther movement was racist, he said. One of the reasons the Colin Powell story is so important is that he was the son of immigrants from Jamaica. He underscores the contribution immigrants make every day to the United States. His life changed when he enrolled in the City College of New York's Reserve Officer Training Corps program, the ROTC. During a summer ROTC training tour in Fayetteville, North Carolina in 1957, he got a pronounced taste of racism when he was forced to use segregated washrooms at gas stations in the South on the drive home to New York. After graduating from City College in June 1958, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army, the start of a 35-year military career. He again experienced the still segregated South during basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. He arrived for his second tour in Vietnam in July of 1968, serving as executive officer of an infantry battalion, then a division operations officer. There, his helicopter crashed. He dragged the commander, his commander, Major General Charles M. Geddes, out of the wreck, suffering a broken ankle. Mr. Powell rose quickly through the ranks, including gaining a battalion command in Korea in 1973 and a brigade command in the elite 101st Airborne Division in 1976. In 1979, Powell, then 42, was promoted to one-star general, becoming the youngest general in the general officer in the Army at the time. In the spring of 1986, he went off to command V Corps or 5 Corps, skipping division command altogether and leading 75,000 soldiers in West Germany. Just 5 months later, President Ronald Reagan summoned him to be National Security Advisor. Mr. Powell left the White House in 1989 to return to lead the Army's Forces Command. The promotion made him the only the fourth black 4-star general in Army history. He saw himself not only as a model for black soldiers, but also as a challenge to white bigotry. In October 1989, Mr. Powell was appointed chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, leapfrogging over 14 more senior 4-star officers. As a general, he was best known for his Powell Doctrine. The Powell Doctrine was born out of the American military's long-standing frustrations with the Vietnam War, in which the United States gradually escalated the use of force and declared periodic pauses in its bombing campaign. If American force is to be used, he said, proponents of the doctrine said, it should be overpowering and decisive. His comments on politics by generals is also very interesting. Quote, anybody who becomes a senior officer in the Army had better have some political instincts or you're going to get ground up, Mr. Powell said in a 2007 New York Times interview. Quote, we are a political nation. It is not a dirty word, politics. Secretary of State is when he was appointed, he returned to government in December 2000, when he was the first person appointed to the cabinet of President-elect George W. Bush. His assignment as Secretary of State started with high hopes and soaring rhetoric from his new boss. Quote, General Powell is an American hero, an American example, and a great American story, unquote. Mr. Bush said that in announcing his choice on December 16, 2000. It's a great day when a son of the South Bronx succeeds to the office first held by Thomas Jefferson. That's how President Bush looked at the first black to become Secretary of State. Former President Donald J. Trump thinks otherwise. He issued a statement after 4 former presidents issued their tributes to General Powell when he died. Trump's rage at anyone who declines to pay obeisance to him is well known. Just last year, Powell had accused Trump of being a habitual liar who was straining the Constitution. Many Republicans did offer tribute to Powell. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, said the nation had, quote, lost a trailblazing leader, unquote, whose life represented a quintessential American story. But that quintessentiality, American story, belonged to a man who was estranged from today's GOP. 9 months ago, following the Trump-inspired riot at the U.S. Capitol, Powell said that he could, quote, no longer call himself a fellow Republican, unquote. He castigated not just Trump, but his enablers within the party. A quarter century before, the Republican Party's nomination had been Powell's for the taking if he wanted it. When he announced he was a Republican, he said, I believe I can help the party of Lincoln move once again close to the spirit of Lincoln. The New York Times considered that to be a clear reference to the issues of race, opportunity, and social welfare that had him at odds with ranking conservative Republican ideologues. The Republican Party must always be, he said, the party of inclusion. Powell told the GOP's 1996 National Convention, the Hispanic immigrant who became a citizen yesterday must be as precious to us as a Mayflower descendant. The descendant of a slave or of a struggling miner in Appalachia must be as welcome and must find as much appeal in our party as in any other party or any other American might. He didn't claim Mexico was sending rapists across the border. Turning to race in that 1996 speech at the convention, Powell added, quote, where discrimination still exists, or where the scars of past discrimination still contaminate and disfigure the present, we must not close our eyes to it. We must declare a level playing field and hope it will go away by itself. It did not in the past. It will not in the future. He didn't talk about S-hole countries or suggest of protesters when the looting starts, the shooting starts, as President Trump did. When Powell criticized Trump last year, the then president shot back that the general was, quote, a real stiff who was very responsible for getting us into the disastrous Middle East wars, unquote. Powell died a decorated hero. Trump will die as a twice impeached president, as a hustler and a liar, and a man determined to wreck the country. A man just the opposite of General Colin Powell. Thank you for paying attention to what I just said. We honor a great man. Thank you. We'll be back next week.